Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of Decentralounge, the podcast presented by GlobalStake, your preferred staking provider for institutions running bare metal and SOC 2 compliant data centers. I am one of the co-hosts, Ryan Haczynski, Director of Protocol Relations at GlobalStake, also with my co-host, Jordan Knecht, who's the Head of Institutional Strategies. And today our guest is none other than Bill Laboon, who is the Head of Education and Grants at the Web3 Foundation. We're very excited to have him on the podcast and have this conversation today to hear from his mellifluous voice and all the big ideas that he loves to share. So, Bill, welcome to the podcast today. Thank you for taking the time. And we'd love to just hear a little bit about your personal story. How did you get to the blockchain world?
Yeah, sure. So first, Ryan, thanks. And Jordan, thank you for having me very much. It's always a pleasure. So how did I get into the blockchain world? I always like to tell the story that I actually was doing research on hash algorithms, and somebody told me about like money, right? That used like the SHA-256, and I was like, what the heck? And this was very early, right? 2010 or so, and I hadn't heard about Bitcoin until then. So I actually read about Bitcoin very early on, thought, oh, that was an interesting idea, but didn't get into it until a few years later. When Ethereum came out is really when I got very interested in blockchain. I played around with Bitcoin. I actually started running a Bitcoin node very early in about 2012. But when I realized Turing completeness was possible, right? Because there's a good reason, right, that Bitcoin is not, Bitcoin script is not Turing complete. And when I saw like this idea of gas, I just was like, wow, okay, right? It's all starting to come together about what's possible. I was teaching at the University of Pittsburgh at the time. Ended up, teaching a course on blockchain at the university there. Also, contributing to an academic journal about distributed ledger technology, and wanting to dive deeper. And when I heard Web3 Foundation was looking for a technical educator, well, I applied immediately. My family and I moved to Switzerland in 2019 and have been working here ever since.
Was it difficult to make the transition from that typical computer science background into the blockchain world, or did you find it was somewhat seamless to make that change?
I think it actually, I wouldn't say seamless. There's definitely differences. However, I had worked in private industry for a long time before I was in academia. I was a software engineer. I guess my first paid software engineering job was 97. And up until 2013, I was a professional software engineer. So there definitely were some differences just in working style, et cetera, as well as like, the Swiss and American styles of working, which are also slightly different. But I would say like I had already, in terms of like the actual work I was doing, it was sort of not a difficult segue. I had been teaching courses on blockchain. I was very into blockchain. I was looking into Polkadot already. I've got even before I worked here, I have a very early trivial commit to the substrate code base. So it wasn't a total switch. Although I certainly did, like, especially the first year, have some, it was interesting, right? Like, the big thing I would say is in academia, or at least at university level, the students all want to be there. And if they don't do well in the class, all right, well, that's their fault. Now, as an educator that reaches out more toward the community, I have to think about other things besides that, right? If someone comes, so if I were I'm not saying I was a bad professor. I think I was a very good professor. You can ask my students. But, if I were a bad professor, well, there's not much they can do about it, right? But if I, have some bad courses or bad whatever, or even uninteresting stuff that I put out, then people don't have to listen to me. They may find some other person to learn from. And so that was a bit of a change, right? Making things and thinking about how to ensure not just that I'm teaching something, but also that it was interesting and being engaging and ensuring all this. It was a slight change from the academic mindset.
Well, I just to kind of throw this out there for those of you who are watching, if you'd like to see some of Bill's teaching, the thing that I highly recommend to so many people is the MOOC that you did. That's 20 plus episodes long, all about blockchain technology. I'll never forget in 2020, after seeing the What is Polkadot video with you and Dan Reeser, and then eagerly diving into that whole course just to get a better understanding of the technology. So I think it's, from one educator to another, you do a great job in trying to really distill the essential information, break it down so anybody can understand it. And we'll make sure we link that when we post this full length podcast, so other people can see those kinds of courses that you've done online. But circling back to Web3 Foundation, can you expand upon a little, more about what the foundation is, how it's connected to Polkadot, Parity Tech? They seem to be all kind of very closely aligned, and what the mission of the Web3 Foundation is.
Sure. So Web3 Foundation, we are in German a Stiftung. We are a foundation, as the name implies, with a specific goal. And our goal, in our founding documents, right, is to help bring about the decentralized web, right, to decentralize the internet. And so this has been our goal, and the main way that we are doing this is through Polkadot. Now, that doesn't mean that's the only thing we do. There's Web3 Summit, which you may have remembered we held for several years. Brought people from all over, from all different ecosystems, and I talk with people from different ecosystems. The blockchain fundamentals course you referred to, actually, I don't think even does more than just mention Polkadot, because the goal is really, right, how do blockchains work at a fundamental level. And so, there's much more references really to things people are more familiar with, like Bitcoin, actually, mostly. So the goal of Web3 Foundation really is to explain, what is the benefit of decentralization? Why are we here? What is the philosophy? Because there are a lot of benefits to it. And also, to be frank, what are the drawbacks and the challenges to it? However, our main focus is supporting Polkadot. One of the ways we do this is by supporting the main developers of Polkadot. So these are people that are developing the Polkadot host, the main technology that runs the nodes. Polkadot is kind of different in that we also have the runtime, the rules for Polkadot, which are now handled by the Polkadot Technical Fellowship, an entirely on-chain collective. That's separate from us. Parity actually gets funding from Web3 Foundation in order to build Polkadot. We also give funding. In the past, we've started. We've given funding to others developing Polkadot host implementations. So probably the most famous is Quadrivium, who have Kagome, which is running a validator on Kusama, but also ChainSafe, which is developed Gossamer, a Go implementation. And we're always looking, for others that are interested in doing this, right, in helping bring about, our vision. So I really see Web3 Foundation as sort of the shepherds, right? We provide advice, we help the sheep, but it's really the sheep's job to go find the good grass to eat, right? And so similarly, here, we don't have the engineers here. We don't have marketing people. What we do have are people like me, technical educators. We provide grants. We do a lot of research. We have, I'm not sure of the exact number right now, but over a dozen PhDs, who do research into the to the protocols, to the tokenomics of the system, voting, things like Grandpa, like Babe. These were Beefy, Sassafras. All of these acronyms you've probably heard of. Many of them were invented here, approved here. We write papers on them. So again, I see us as sort of shepherds, not just of Polkadot, but also of the broader Web3 world.
It's funny that you mentioned that, being a shepherd, because it seems like we've seen, recently we had the rebranding of Substrate to the Polkadot SDK. And we're seeing sort of the proliferation of this open source software development platform now being used by other chains. Recently, we've seen Cardano show an interest in the Polkadot SDK. There are some other implementations such as Polygon and Veil that are already running it. I believe Starknet is using it. What do you think this says about the Web3 Foundation's mission in its effort to educate others? Do you think that this has something to do with the adoption of the Polkadot SDK outside of the ecosystem itself?
I do think so, because our job really is very tech focused, and we are supporting Substrate and the Polkadot SDK, and it really is amazing technology, right? So one of the reasons I first got interested in Polkadot was seeing Gav's talk at Web3 Summit 2018. He famously pulled out a laptop, and then by a brand new laptop, and by the end of it had a running blockchain on his computer, and I was very interested in or what are all the different trade-offs between chains, and this really spoke to me. And so I think a lot of other teams in different ecosystems are seeing this, right? Substrate is this amazingly flexible framework for building blockchains, and we've seen not just teams in other ecosystems, but also teams that want to build solo chains using Substrate. And I do see this as part of teams seeing the benefits, right? When you see good tech, you want to use it. And I think this actually has a lot of benefits for Polkadot. I see, because Polkadot, I think is pretty obviously the largest substrate-based system out there, right? Especially between the relay chains and all the parachains running on Polkadot. And I've seen actually, on Twitter, I read Twitter probably more than I should, people saying, well, what's the point, right? Why is this benefiting Polkadot? But, then I think, my response to this is, standards are a good thing, and they often end up benefiting the originator of those standards. When you think about the EVM, for instance, there are a lot of EVM clone chains. There are a lot of L2s that basically just have on Ethereum, for instance, right, that have their own the EVM implementations. There's a lot of other chains that use EVM, but I don't think this is hurting Ethereum, right? It's providing a lot of tools, right? It's providing a lot of how would you say, input on how things work, and what works and what doesn't as people make changes. But this all flows back, right, to Ethereum, because they're the ones who created the EVM in the first place, and still the largest ecosystem. I think everyone here can agree that's EVM based. And so I see it similarly with Substrate, is that all of these other teams are building it. There's more demand for tools. There are more people building infrastructure for it. And that really flows back to Polkadot and the people developing on Polkadot. And that's really our goal, right? We have obviously as a foundation, we have these very abstract goals of bringing about the decentralized internet. But when we think of concrete things to do to bring that about, what I think is we need builders, we need developers, and the better we can make the lives of developers, the more developers will come and build on it. And having more people use a language, a framework, a paradigm, an ecosystem, right? It all comes back, right, to us, and helps benefit, our foundation's more abstract goals.
Do you think and this kind of circles back to the grant making process, the Web3 Foundation just announced not that long ago a large grant that they're going to be seeding a lot of different projects. Do you feel that that is also going, one of the aims for those abstract missions to try and draw in developers? Do you think part of the Web3 Grant Foundation, that this process that they're about to go through, is to seek to find additional developers to come from outside the ecosystem, or just anybody who's generally interested in building on the Polkadot SDK?
So that's part of it. So this program that you referring to is decentralized futures. So futures.web3.foundation, if you want to put a link to it, which is offering 20 million US dollars and 5 million DOT to teams that are building in the Polkadot ecosystem. And this is a very broad definition, right? And yes, I mean, grants have historically been a large part of what Web3 Foundation does. We've given out grants to a lot of parachain teams, a lot of people who have built, the wallets and the infrastructure and the block explorers and all kinds of things that make a blockchain actually usable, right? So, I actually remember very early days dealing with Kusama, and there weren't always great block explorers available back then. A lot of querying chain state to figure out what happened, and it's not so fun. So yeah, I mean, I see. So a big part of this goal is not just to bring this about, but to make sure that we bring it about in a decentralized way. So Web3 Foundation and Parity, we have been decentralizing. We have there are some teams that have been with Parity, but we think that their jobs would be better done by the community. But that doesn't mean that the people who are doing them are bad, right? We want to provide them support, right, to go out and form smaller groups and help build the ecosystem in a more decentralized way. So that's part of the goal of decentralized futures. Another part of the goal is to encourage people that are already building on Polkadot to get the funding that they need to really start doing things as a self-sustaining business. And a lot of times a business right, you just need a little bit of startup capital essentially, right, in order to get things flowing, and then you can be sustainable. There's a big jump between like a fun project you do on the weekends to a self-sustaining business, but after that it can be more what's the word, grows on its own, right? You just need that jump, that quantum leap, right, which we can provide. The third thing is to bring fresh ideas from outside the ecosystem and bring more people in. So I wouldn't say that the specific goal of the Decentralized Futures Program is to bring others in. I would say that the goal is a little bit more abstract than that. It's to ensure that we have a decentralized, strong, and stable ecosystem, and we're hoping to help kickstart that with this program.
It seems very well received so far. I mean, that goes without saying. People are excited. They're generating ideas. They're coming up with things that probably you're gonna see as proposals coming across your desk or across the grants team desk very soon. One thing I've been thinking about lately, like you, I'm on Twitter probably too much, and Web3, the term, seems to have been co-opted in some sense. I go on Spaces and people talk about Web3 as if it's NFTs. And, the people who understand the term or know where it came from, it was, I believe, coined by one of the co-founders of Polkadot, Gavin Wood, nearly 10 years ago in 2014. And that's clearly what the Web3 Foundation is striving toward. If you could picture what a decade down the road looks like for the Web3 Foundation, where do you see all this going in terms of the decentralization of the web and how Web3 Foundation is going to be instrumental in leading the way in these efforts?
Yeah, that's a really broad question. Yeah, so I have ideas, and I want to clarify that I don't think any of us knows exactly where things are going.
Sure.
Honestly, if you would have told me 10 years ago when I was looking at, all right, how exactly, more than 10 years ago, like 13 years ago, like, all right, how exactly does a SHA-256 function lead to having money, right? I don't think I could have told you that at some point people would be trading monkey pictures and saying GM friend and things on Twitter, right? So I think in some ways the future is, if not unknowable, we're never going to get it perfectly right. But one thing that I do think we're going to see is more people understanding the need for self-sovereignty, more people understanding why decentralization is important. And I feel like for some people, we've seen this. We've seen data leaks, right? Massive data leaks, right? Of because you have essentially these honeypots of data, right? That banks store or Target or Home Depot or whatever. Just like some of these famous data leaks, people lost their credit cards and things. Credit cards, yeah, also to me they're ridiculous, right? If you know the number on a credit card, anyone can take money from that. Like, why? It's like showing your private key everywhere. And a lot of these things, like as a computer scientist, I look at and I just think, okay, blockchain and decentralization makes so much more sense. There are always trade-offs, right? And there are hacks, but I think these are things that we're going to solve. Right now we are still in a very chaotic era, right? You see a lot of projects that put code up that isn't adequately tested, that isn't verified, etc. But if you think about an airplane or a car, think how many lines of code. Like a car, I've heard now I'm going to get the number slightly wrong. So, but like a regular car sold in America today has something like 100 million lines of code in it, and your cars are pretty safe. Why? Because that code is not something that some anons are writing and throwing up, and then it's got $100 million of value in it the next day, right? It's well tested, it's verified, it's checked, it's written by professionals, and so I guess there's a couple of things here. One, just like everything, right? You read any history of computing, it always goes from like the hackers, in the old school term of the word, right? People fooling around and stuff, and it eventually gets professionalized and things are solidified as time goes on. And I think we're going to see that in Web3. Now, I hope we can do this without losing a lot of the philosophy, behind it and the rationale for doing it in the first place. So that's one thing I think we're going to see. The second thing is I think people are going to realize, right? So just like in the 70s and 80s, people started to realize hey, computers can be used for sending email, and and then the 90s for buying things, etc. People were thinking about this well before that, but ordinary people were thinking, well, I can just send a letter in an envelope. I can just use the Sears catalog and call the people up, right? They didn't see the benefits, and I think it's the same with Web3 right now in terms of self-sovereignty of data. People think, well, why do I need to have this responsibility? I can just trust Facebook. I can just trust Elon Musk and X or Twitter. I can just trust all of these people. And I think eventually people will see the benefits, but it's a slow process, right? And it starts with the tech nerds and then sort of slowly diffuses out into the broader population. We've seen this with email, we've seen this with the web, we've seen this with so many things in the past. And a lot of the things that you start with in any technology seem ridiculous, right? Ryan, I think you're about the same age as me. I can't remember, but I'm sure. Do you remember GeoCities web pages?
Oh yeah.
They were ridiculous. They were silly. Or MySpace, right, with little MIDI tunes playing in the background. But it was people playing, and people figured out what worked, and now it's the web is something that's very useful, right? I can't imagine living without the web nowadays. And I think a lot of what passes for Web3 right now is this very silly stuff that shows that we're in the early days of people trying things. And there's nothing wrong with that. I hope that we can continue to have a sort of lighthearted attitude and continue to play around with things. But yeah, I also see, so I guess to sort of answer your question, I apologize, I sort of meandered there. So two things is, one, I see professionalization of this space. People not throwing contracts up, but rather doing a really thorough analysis and understanding that this stuff is very important to get right. And we'll see tools for helping to get it right. Again, I'm a former programmer. I was a C programmer in the old days. I can't imagine just writing C like I used to in the 90s. Not using static analysis tools on it, not having, there's a lot of different mechanisms to help prevent a lot of the problems that we've seen, like buffer overflows in the past. Or using other languages than C, right? Like Rust, for instance, which Substrate is written in. And then, the second is a broader understanding of what it's good for. So the example I always like to give is, my son is 10, and he's, I love my son. He's not a computer programmer, right? But he has figured out Minecraft, right? And I'm confused. And he's like, no, this type of block does this, and he's made these huge things. Why? Because he was incentivized to learn about them. It's because it's fun for him. It's something cool. He gets a benefit from it. He can show off to his friends. And I think it's the same with self-sovereignty, right? When people understand the benefits, then they'll take the time to learn. And hopefully, from our perspective as technologists, we also can make it easier for them.
Well, sorry to give you such a broad question, but I think those are wonderful answers, Bill. We're coming up on time. Do you have any closing thoughts about what you'd like to share just in the Web3 Foundation, how people can get involved, anything like that?
Sure. So I already mentioned we had the Decentralized Futures Program, which is giving out quite a bit of funding for people looking to build. We still have the traditional grants program, which is really meant for smaller projects, very tech focused, has to be open source. We also have the on-chain treasury. Ryan, I know I watch attempts at governance. I can rarely tune in live, but I do watch it quite often. So there's treasury proposals with a very large on-chain treasury and a governance community that I think is really second to none. With a lot of activity happening in it. So there's a lot of ways for people to build on Polkadot, and Polkadot really lets you, so not only is there funding for this, but there's also a lot of possibilities of things that you can do with Polkadot. We see some very interesting stuff happening in the ecosystem. So like Teddy DAO, which I think is very cool. I'm a Teddy owner myself, Teddy number 54. And I would love to see personally more projects that are trying something new, something that isn't even possible perhaps to do in another ecosystem like Bitcoin or Ethereum. And I really want to encourage the builders. And if you want to build on Polkadot but you don't know what to build, we have a whole list of RFPs of things that we're looking to build. Or if you have an idea but you don't have funding for it, we'll help you with that. So really, if there are any builders out there, I'd be happy to talk with you on how we can best help you to build in the Polkadot ecosystem.
Well, thanks so much, Bill, for taking the time. For those of you who are interested, we will have those links to the Centralized Futures Program, also to Bill's massively open online course on blockchain fundamentals. If you're interested in that, you can follow Bill on Twitter, where he spends too much time, just like me, at Bill Laboon, just as it's spelled, his name. And his pinned tweet has his novel, Strength in Numbers, which I would be remiss in not suggesting that you read. It's a great book. I really enjoyed it. We could have a whole conversation just on that. But thanks so much again, Bill, for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.